The doctor is most certainly in the house. In fact, our telephone lines are also open for you to ask your questions on 083-913-3728. The topic of the day is migraines. We all suffer from headaches. We've had one from time to time, but when it gets really bad, then the word migraine gets thrown around. And I'm really told that an actual migraine, though, is far more severe than a simple headache, and it comes with other sorts of symptoms as well. So that's why the doctor's in the house today to dissect this topic of migraines. You were saying it's not just a simple headache,
No,
is it? What is a migraine?
It's actually a neurological state that the brain goes into, and that sounds very complex, but there's a lot of asynchronicity. In other words, things are not gelling well in the environment of the brain and the blood vessels and that relationship. So the theories that have been proposed in science are what we call neurovascular theories. So they involve inflammation and chemical substances in the brain, but also the blood vessel theories themselves, where it was thought that a blood vessel goes into spasm, and then in response to that, it opens up, and it opens up too widely and allows then a quick surge of pressure in that part of the brain that then triggers the headache. So obviously it's a wide spectrum of complex symptoms that is brought about depending on the magnitude of the areas affected of the brain, etc. And it's on a spectrum of headaches. You even get a migraine without headache, for example.
Wow.
Where you have an aura only, which is the warning or preceding event to the headache, but without the headache itself.
Okay.
So very interesting, and certainly quite a few different types of migraines, but understanding that is crucial.
Yeah, and perhaps you at home do suffer from migraines and you have got questions to ask. Remember that our phone lines are open, 083-913-3728. Now, doctor, are there certain people that are predisposed to experiencing migraines, or is it something that can be triggered by anything, and that thus we're all vulnerable?
Yes, no, certainly there are people that are more prone. Genetically, there's no specific inherited pattern. In other words, that every single member of a mom or a dad that had a headache would have migraines. But what we do see is there is definitely a genetic, what we call a propensity in families, where certain types of migraines, for example, are certainly run in families. One of them are just what we call the hemiplegic migraine. It looks like you've had a stroke, basically, with numbness, tingling, and even weakness of one side that can last hours up to days, even after the headache, without having had a stroke as such.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have other triggers like diet, for example. Some old matured cheeses, some beautiful red wines and chocolates are associated with triggering, and people will recognize what types of food actually trigger them, and sometimes even certain nuts are involved in triggering the headaches. And then, of course, lack of sleep has been known, bright lights for some people as well. And then, you know, the big ones are obviously things like stress and dehydration. So if you have a propensity to develop them, these are the things that we've identified so far that can exacerbate it.
Yeah. Well, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Darren Green right after the break. In fact, remember that our lines are open, 083-913-3728. But let's also find out what else you can expect on this morning's edition of your Feel Good Breakfast Show.